going to get us started. It's just 1 or 2 or 3 or 4, depending on where you are. And I know, as usual, we'll have more people coming in along the way. But I'm going to start by just, here's our agenda. You know it from the emails, but we'll be, Anne is going to tell us a bit about what she's got going on in her program. And then we're going to move on again to the framework. And partly, I know we've done this twice already, the framework, but we're really trying to make sure that it works and that it fits the needs that you and others may have, and then the open Q&A. Don't forget to highlight your library name. I think I forgot to mention that last week or the week before, so make sure to highlight your name. And if you do forget at any time, you can always go back. It doesn't get locked down or something, so that's easy enough to do. So I am going to get us started with Anne. Anne, are you ready? Tell us what you're up to.
Yes, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, let me share my screen. Can you see it?
Yes. Yep.
Can you see my slides? Okay.
Yep.
So I'm just gonna, set up my watch here so I know what time it is. Hi, I'm Anne. I'm from Kenton County Public Library, and we are located near Cincinnati across the river. It's northern Kentucky, so there's some influence there. And I'm a digital librarian. I work in the IT department, and I wrote the grant and I'm the project manager, but we have 3 branches in our library, and they're each doing different programs customized to each branch. So Covington is our urban branch, and what we've been doing is we hired college students to teach as Ready to Code educators in 5 elementary schools. And then we have programs at the library and a nearby community center for teens and youth. And then we're creating kits for informal learning in the library. And then our other branch, our suburban branch, is, I think they always say that it's one of the busiest, if not the busiest in the state in terms of circulation. So it's a booming, very busy branch. So they have the challenge of a lot going on. So they're doing programs for preschoolers and younger elementary students within their spectrum of programs. And then we just opened a makerspace there, and they're starting different Ready to Code related programs. And then we did outreach at the high school, connecting with the library media specialists. So we did a Girls Who Code club, but that evolved into just a generally coding club because we couldn't attract girls, which we think is attributed to starting mid-year. So because they're already invested in doing other things. So we're going to try again in fall. Then we have our rural branch, which is Independence, and their sort of personality is that they have lower population, and so the branch was built for the projection of a higher population, so they have more room for experimentation, they have more time. So they've been doing a regular Saturday code club and then designing special programs just for families related to Ready to Code. So I'm going to focus on 3 things. The first, connected learning. So this is something that we found that relationships in general, if we focus on those, will be successful. So that's relationships with partners in the community, similarly minded, same mission, and just keeping our relationships strong. And also in the smaller way, just the relationships with the kids and the family. So the more we know about them, the more successful we are. Another thing I think has been essential is just integrating our computer science and computational thinking with what we are already doing. So putting it into our current programs and including making activities because kids are wanting to use their hands. The challenge has been, which I would call the dark side of connected learning, is that there's so much going on. More than one time I've heard, oh, my daughter wanted to do that, but she has chess club, or he has soccer. So there's a conflict with these connections, but it's not, I don't think it's bad, especially if they're learning chess. There's definitely a crossover in sort of the thinking. So that's, again, we're trying to do more integration and not starting new things necessarily. So someone in our library who's sort of amazing at this is a children's librarian at Erlanger. Her name is Jill Frazier. So these are just a couple examples of what she's done. So she partnered with the Girl Scouts, who are also very much about connected learning. And she just hosted some programs so they could earn their robotics badges. So here's some pictures from her program using the robots in the library. And working with Ozobots and Bebots and, having a great time. She also does the traditional library story times. So this is the way to put coding into what you're already doing. So she took a story like Brown Bear, and Groovy Joe and pointed out the patterns as a part of the writing and the language. And then she sort of expanded the program off of that. So she developed very simple pattern exercise. So she had the kids just verbally tell her the color order, the color pattern, and then she had them do an exercise in making the robot turn on the floor. And while they were waiting their turn, she gave them a little handout with following the letter patterns. So that's Jill. And I would say that the challenge for us in our library is, can we replicate Jill? Because at our other branches, we don't have a Jill. So what do we do? So we've been thinking about that and sort of the balance of capitalizing on people's strengths and how to sort of build on that. And then another thing we focus on in community partnerships, and this has sort of been the thing that I've spent a lot of time with, and as an introvert, my go-to initial method is sending emails. And it has been very successful. You do the research and find people who may have similar mission. So the results for us was a partnership with our local college, Northern Kentucky University. So, and specifically their computer science department, and also a after-school program in our organization that does the after-school programs in our local schools in Covington. So why I would recommend this kind of partnership, we found and hired college students who were deeply invested in the youth based on their own experiences. They all had stories of why they wanted to help. And 80% of those that we hired were women and or students of color. And they all had stories about being the only person in their class, not having opportunities when they were kids. And then we took their experience and matched them with elementary students in the schools that lacked resources, that were the most diverse, that had the most poverty. So these college students were able to be representative for these younger students. So another reason the college has added some capacity, I didn't even anticipate this, they have space to meet. We've been able to borrow equipment and use all the facilities that the college students have access to. so in terms of marketing, we're seeing that there's more potential there, especially given the librarians and computer scientists are not that good at marketing. So we're hoping to add on a skill set there. And the computer science department at NKU has the same issue. They are working on diversity in their recruitment and retention. And so again, there's just a really strong correlation for what we're doing. And some of the challenges with working with the school and the students is our students didn't have a lot of them don't have cars. So they're relying on a really inadequate mass transportation system. So that is that's a big challenge. I mentioned promoting the project, and as I know that those of you working with schools, fitting into what they have going on is challenging. So we've done our best with that, and the students have been really good in helping with that too. And finally, for design thinking, I've sort of tried to integrate it a little bits at a time instead of doing, we were going to just do a big workshop, but instead I've just introduced exercises into our educator meeting. So when the college students and I get together to work on the project, we do exercises in design thinking using the design thinking for library toolkit. And then just in general in our library, because we are decentralized, I promote it as a process for us to come together and get results across our different branches. So a specific use of design thinking, these are our 6 outcomes that we wanted to, these are our outcomes for the project. So the first 5 are a little more straightforward, and the 6th is very sort of, let's say, needs to be broken out into more specific things. So feeling a sense of belonging. So we wanted the students to feel they belong and carry that with them through the future. So we did, with the Ready to Code educators, we did some exercises. The first, we just had them talk about their experiences of belonging in a community. So they interviewed each other, and they went out in the library and interviewed someone about just in general, what does it mean to belong? So we're just taking this kind of larger research. And then this is one of my favorite exercises. We did the analogous experience. So you take the experiences you've had and you sort of dissect what the components are, and then you try to translate them to your current situation. So the activities of joining a group, you have to go to a new place and meet new people. There's emotions a part of that. There's a language a part of that. And you might have to demonstrate skills, thus leading back to the fear and anxiety. And then we looked at what other places have this kind of dynamic. So when you go to work, if you go to a religious organization, schools, a sorority, if you're moving to this country or moving within the country. And then finally, what kinds of things do these organizations do to go cultivate the sense of belonging? So some have initiations, there's greeters, there's buddies, they have mascots and things. So from that, we narrowed it down into some things that we are going to do and test in our program. So I told them we're going to do 2 small things, 1 big thing. So I think one of the things that very simple things that I really liked was just giving the kids a list of vocabulary that they've learned. So that's sort of a very tangible way of showing that they have gained something and that they can talk the language, so to speak. And then just very simply, the Ready to Code educators talking individually to the students and having a conversation about their strengths and how they belong and that they can do this and they see them doing this in the future. So that's probably the simplest of all, but it's a matter of intention. And then the college students ask specifically, they want Google t-shirts. So I don't know if that's possible, but we're hoping to do t-shirts of some sort. And then just simple little awards that illustrate the students' unique qualities and how they belong in computer science. So then our big thing is, it looks like it's going to happen, is we're going to bring the kids to the college and have them tour the campus and, feel that this is sort of an image of their future. So that is it.
That's great, Anne. Thank you. Any questions? I love the field trip to the college where they get to see the stuff. And I think the other thing that I thought was really interesting to me, one of the other things was when you talked about being intentional about, at the end, about the belonging conversation. I think I've said this to Caitlin more than once. There's all this stuff that we already do and already collect that we don't necessarily do intentionally. So turning, what's the opposite of intention? Non-intention into having things that demonstrate what's going on is really great. Do people have questions or comments? Oh, Paula and Misty, let's see. Paula, collective and community. Juan is saying he wanted to learn more about CS and CT with the traditional library programs. Anything you can add about that? Anne or Juan, do you want to speak and ask that question?
I will.
Go ahead.
Well, I would say it's more, it's coming from my sort of as we gather the feedback from what's successful, this is where I'd have to advocate in the library. So sharing what Jill is doing with the other branches and showing how that when other staff are resistant to maybe not having time, or what is this important, and that it's sort of based on my position in the library. I don't have the position of telling people what they need to be doing. So it's more the advocating for it. So I'm going to have to get back to you on more success stories with that. But I think what I'm going to do is just advocate for that to our administrative staff.
Great, thanks.
That in a story time, to me, if you can do it in a story time, where can't you do it?
Absolutely. Anybody else? Questions or comments, thoughts? All right. Well, thank you, Anne, for doing that. That was great. And, I haven't asked this before, but I realized some people have done PowerPoints, and I don't think we've asked for them. So if you don't mind, and Caitlin, maybe you have, and I haven't internalized it, but if people have PowerPoints that you've done for these and you could upload them to the materials section of the community of practice, that would be great. Caitlin, that makes sense? All right, cool. Thanks. Where's the pool? I don't see a pool, Caitlin. Sorry. All right, so we're going to move on to talking about the framework. And so we have some questions, and hoping, I said this when we first started, I know we've done this twice already, but we're hoping to really hone in and get a sense of, does this really work? Do we need to make changes? And if so, what are the best changes we need to make? And when the team was talking about the framework, we were thinking about how important it is to be able to put yourself into it and think about how you would use it, and then where you would see yourself in it. So it's at this point, I think we're asking you to say, where do you see yourself in this framework? And then we can expand from there. And that's why I'm I always do this when I use these frameworks. I'm like, I put the I in. So I said to put the I in the big idea. And also you could do it with the bulleted lists. And Nikki on earlier this week or last week just gave us the big ideas and in the framework. So maybe let's start with that. And I'd love to know where people, if they see themselves, like, so I recognize the need for inclusive and diverse learning experiences, or I demonstrate services and programs, where do you see yourselves in the providing and creating inclusive learning environments? Text, chat, audio, whatever you want to do.
Can you repeat the question again, Linda?
I can, Juan. Where do you, or you, like I'm pointing at all the images, where do you see yourself in that first category? Like if you put I before each of those big ideas, where would you be? And your program in your library.
And I can share a little bit. My internet connection's going in and out, so hopefully I'll stay. But recently I was doing an interview, I don't think she's here, but Julia from Normal Public Library, one of the cohort members, and we were talking about the framework a little bit, and we just, I mean, in talking about it, she started to identify, oh, well, I think we're at this level, but we really want to be at this level. And she was saying, you know, putting herself in the framework was an easier way to give feedback than just kind of the more conceptual, what do you guys think kind of thing. So we thought that maybe we could try it with the group, and that would be an easier way to say, like, does this actually reflect what you guys think about your own libraries and yourselves? Because if it doesn't, then the framework isn't working.
Then it's a problem. So is it possible to say I for that first, or any of the levels, but I was starting at the first, to say I and see yourself in one of the, see your library and the work you're doing in one of those?
I'm sorry, I missed the last session. Can you share a link of where we are reading that? Or?
Absolutely. It's in, I'm putting the link in the chat right now, the framework.
Okay. Let me see if I can provide some feedback.
We're looking at the first box,
right,
correct?
Right, providing and creating inclusive learning environments. And then underneath, we separated out the big idea from the rest, just thinking that it might be easier to look at the big idea. But if you scroll down to the next page, then you see that the details, or I appreciate the value of reaching underrepresented youth. I acknowledge the importance.
Can I say for that very first one, the importance of CT and creating an inclusive environment, I think that's the one that I feel in my library personally is the most competent at, so at the highest level. But I think that would be the same for everyone here because we came with that mindset. So I think everyone here would be at the highest level on that one, because we know that CT and CS are very important, and we obviously are trying to make it a diverse, culturally diverse and inclusive learning environment. So on that one, I think that we're advocates and ready to go. It's the ones below that maybe we don't all hit.
What do other people think? That's great, thank you. Other thoughts on that?
I've always had a, I don't want to say an issue, but some sort of like, because I think I am on awareness and then implementation and mentoring, where I sometimes see that as the most difficult part of this part is the part where it says like actively works to understand community need, right? Because that requires you to embed yourself in your community expose them to this kind of content and material first, and then you begin to explore some ideas from them on what is it that they really see adding to this. So I think that it's like a long-term relationship and work that needs to happen for you to begin to really do this kind of community-based CT and CS work, right? Because I think they're like different levels. I don't know if that makes any if I explain myself.
So Juan, you made me think of something that I don't know is accurate or true or relates to what you said exactly, but it makes me think that you could be at a 4. Can one really be at a 4? They're not numbered, but at the mentor level without being at a 2? Can you advocate and mentor without? Because I'm wondering if these are not.
Because I can go to the community, right, and I can say, okay, here's a workshop that I have for you that I think that you guys are going to really benefit from that, right? But that's coming from my expertise and my knowledge, right, without really being embedded yet in the community. They might have a different, and then that kind of workshop that I create for them, if I'm really embedded in the community and I start working with them, I think it will emerge, new things will emerge from the early exposure. And so I begin to iterate with them.
Right. I'm just wondering if the understanding level in this one, what it says is not right, is not the correct, like it doesn't go up in the right way, right?
Yes.
So because that's the other thing we're curious about is how people move from level to level.
Right,
So,
and that understanding in this case, like Juan
Yeah.
said, is more of it's a constant thing. You're never
Yeah.
just done with that and moving on. It's something that's continuously ongoing.
Yeah, and then that understanding and actively working to understand community is different, right? You're creating a different like action here because actively works is different than understanding. I mean, I think, right?
Well, the actively work is supposed to get you to the understanding, but I'm not sure it's right here. So that's great. That's really helpful.
Yeah, I agree with Juan on that. When I was reading the understanding section, I was like, how do you actively work and understand? I agree with Juan on that one.
Yeah, that's a hard one. It's really hard. It's a lofty goal, right? But how you get there, I think.
Right. Okay. All right. And there's some great conversation here about, if you're are we talking about in a system, each branch, or even just in your own, a single library, each person, each branch, how does that all fit? Oh, and hi, Randy. I just saw that you're taking over for Julia. Welcome.
Yeah, I think it's when you evaluate it at like the library system level, or it's that kind of confusion of like how you're evaluating it is where things can get torn up, because you might, there's departments that might be doing things differently than yours, or you know that you have this awareness in this one area, but like you're working towards it in another area. Yeah. I guess it's like, who's the we that's looking at the framework and putting themselves in it? Is it the person doing the program, or is it the library as a whole, or department as a whole? I don't know.
And I think that would have to do with what the program is that you want to do, right? So I think the idea is if the framework is part of this toolkit and a librarian comes into it, are you at a level where you just want to do a program on your own? In which case it might just be, where are you? But I think that, the kind of loftiest of goals, or the goals for some of the smaller libraries where they have to always be thinking about their own library and 3 branches at all moments, then you would look at that larger scale. But I think you could use it. I think we're trying to design it so that you could use it at those levels, depending on what you're kind of there to do.
And that also makes me think that we need to describe that when we finally get this all together for everyone.
Right, and I think this has been said before, like we need an intro to what is this framework and what are we doing with it? But this is exactly the kind of thing. This is great to hear these.
Because I think that maybe instead of like naming and understanding, you name it something that would describe what you have under there, which is outreach or community engagement, or because you're aware that you work with the community, that you're implemented, and then you become an advocate, right? So maybe just right now, you know.
Can I ask something about the advocating, mentoring, and advocating stage? With all this talk about the different system or the different levels, branch, system, and whatnot, is there more generic terms we could use in terms of mentoring and advocacy? Because I could see like a branch that wants to take it on and then advocate to admin and to the system. This is something that we should continue instead of it just being the community stakeholders, where maybe the system advocates and tries to get the community on board. Also speaking to those individuals who are trying this out and trying to get their system on board. Because I know a lot of people here have also been trying to get administration on board too. And it doesn't really allow for them to think that way when they look at it for themselves. It maybe looks too grand, like it's above them in their individual space.
So is then it called something like, who's got an idea? I hear what you're saying. I think it makes sense. I'm just not sure.
But isn't the community, the stakeholder, isn't the library administration a stakeholder in the community?
Perhaps, but maybe I was trying to look at it from when I used to just work at a library branch, and I'd want to try something new. And part of that is convincing my superiors and administration, which doesn't automatically trigger community stakeholders. I guess the same thing, it's still advocating and making your argument for it. It's just, I guess when we talk about seeing it through different levels, no matter what level you're at, you can see yourself in it. I think that might be one place where they wouldn't see themselves in terms of that level, in terms of advocating.
And do you think that's a level people want to get to?
I
right?
do.
Go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm a huge fan of advocating. I like that level. I don't think some people may not want to get to that level because they're not comfortable there. But I'm a fan of the more people that advocate, the more that it becomes prevalent. So,
right.
I wonder, sorry, just building off what Mandy said, I wonder if there's a way to add a piece about that you are advocating, or, you know, speaking with Carl. So speaking with the different pieces that you're speaking with in that first bullet point, I think sort of hits with some of what Mandy was talking about with who you're advocating towards, who you're talking with, who you're working with. But I'm wondering if there could be an additional piece in there as well about maybe what, I don't know if it should be like what the advocacy looks like, or how, I wonder if that needs to be fleshed out a little bit. I think that's what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
Or adding something that says, you know, also internally or within the institution, something like that.
Yeah, maybe that, because I think advocacy is an important level because it is the next step. Like, you agree with it, you implement it, and now you're spreading the, I mean, you not only internalize it, but you're taking it outside of your own personal library or space so that others can also do it. But I think I like what Juan said, where you add maybe another term where it can be different levels within the advocacy section.
I'd like to add something about advocating. Hello?
Yes, go for it, Claudia. Go ahead.
Hello?
Yes.
Oh, it's Cheryl.
Cheryl, sorry. I said the wrong. I was reading
Okay.
Claudia and hearing Cheryl. Go.
Okay, yeah, with the thing on advocating, what we've done, because our library is very community responsive, is all these things, providing inclusive environments, connecting with youth, engaging with the communities. It's to have the community be able to advocate for the library, for these programs. So it's not necessarily the librarian, with what I've done, to go and tell the community, advocate for yourself, but to really hear from your community. And then when you're connecting youth interests and you're emphasizing youth voice, then you're really, really hearing from them. And I found that when the community members can speak up and the youth can tell you what they want for the library, then that kind of helps you do a good program. And your job is to inform them about what the library can do, but hear back and listen and do an event. For us, our library, the big thing was, we did was the drag queen story time. And that was very controversial, but it was informed by a lot of our youth and a lot of the community members telling us this is something they would like. They would like to have more information about resources for LGBTQ youth. They brought it, they spoke up for it to council members, they spoke up to it to administrators. So I think all these frameworks, they prepare your library to really serve your community, but also really hear back from your community and empower your community to speak for your library. Does that make sense?
Right. So in that category, there's in at least some of these, there should be something about empowering community to speak up for the library, something. So it's not just
exactly speak up.
Them speak.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So the community to speak up for what they want in their library, what they want their library to continue providing for them. Because at the end of the day, it's the community that determines and that can put the pressure to provide resources for a library.
Right. Great, thank you. So each of these areas, content areas, inclusive learning environments, connecting youth interests, and empowering youth voice, community engagement, and family engagement have these levels. So if I were to say to you, where do you fit on each? And you don't necessarily have to put it in, but would you be able to do that? Like if you went through and did the I statements for each of them, are there other things in the different categories that you go, oh no, this doesn't really fit? And you can think about it for you, or for the I at this point being you or your library or your staff or whatever. And I understand that the understanding one is a little bit funky.
You were saying that, can I put the I in all of the categories?
Right, and then figure out where you, SPL, other staff would be.
Oh,
Right.
all
All of them. So could you go down and say, oh, let me go through connecting youth interests. Do these all work with the I for my setting, right? Does that make sense to people? Paula, yours question is, the question mark is about the thing you had above, right? Not about that. Thanks.
Linda, I don't think I understand what you're asking me to do.
I'm asking everyone to then do the exact same thing.
Okay.
With the other categories or content areas. Okay. So if you look at connecting youth interests, I recognize I actively work. Of course, you can put the I in it, but do they work?
I see. Do they work in general, you mean?
Right, and well, in thinking about your library and your setting.
Got you, okay. Instead of doing I, I'm going to do SPL.
All right.
All right.
Claudia, can you say more about that?
Yeah, so I was looking at that and I was thinking that, you know, for a lot of libraries, this framework may be completely brand new. And so I think that the understanding part may not always reflect what they've already been doing. Like, I think you can move from awareness to understanding to really deeply understanding these big ideas, and demonstrate in kind of new endeavors. Because I don't want to assume that every library is already doing these things. Like, we've talked a lot about, you know, CT and things that we're already doing at the library, but I don't necessarily think that will be the case for everyone reading this toolkit. And I think I'm a little weary of getting so far removed from the toolkit that people brand new to this concept either, you know, get kind of glazed over or get too intimidated. I think we've kind of talked about that a little bit, and I don't want there to be this assumption that you can't be at the understanding level if you're not already doing things like this.
So this makes me nervous to say, but I wonder if there needs to be a level between awareness and understanding.
I think it's that statement, though. I think you can be at a level of understanding where it's more like demonstrate how it fits into what you're currently doing, or, you know, something else. I'm having a
Linda,
little
this makes
trouble with
me
language.
This makes me think that in phase 2, when we were talking about spectrums, there was something called recognition that was in there. It was like, oh, recognizing what we're already doing, and then kind of going and doing that deeper understanding and for CS and CT. But that first kind of recognition of what you might already be doing that you never called that before, like the pattern recognition with little kid story hours. And maybe that word needs to get into this spectrum in some way.
Yeah, and we have recognize and awareness, but as you say that, I don't think awareness is recognize. Awareness is awareness.
Yeah.
I know I'm not, I mean, you're not supposed to do this, and recognize is recognize. So I think you're right.
But then you're going to run into the problem or be having something that is so nuanced that you can go and come to break it down in such many ways that it's going to become this endless list, right?
Right, and so maybe we need to rethink, I think the 4, nobody wants 8 phases, levels, but maybe that first one
but I also
needs to be
the other thing that I was thinking is that you should give some like direction of like, are you expecting this to be progressive? Are you expecting to move right 1, then 2, 3, or 4? Or are you coming in, can you come at 1 and, you know, like that kind of thing? Or can you stay at 1? Can you become aware and then stay there for a while, and then when you're ready, you move to 2, etc. Right? I think that might be, I don't know. I'm just brainstorming with you guys.
Is it possible that awareness and recognition could share? Because sometimes when you recognize that you're doing this, that's an awareness in itself. Like, you know, I'm aware of these CT patterns. I'm aware of their importance, and you can kind of see what you're already doing. And understanding. So I keep reading through those columns, and I know why it says actively works to understand, because what it is talking about is constantly changing, and it means that you're constantly trying to understand. So would it be easier, instead of looking at all the descriptions, to just change understanding to active understanding, or something to reflect that that is an ongoing process, that you participate in it? So that you still keep the flexibility of the statements below the chart.
Right, that's a good point. We could even think about just changing awareness to recognition, and seeing how that flows. And I think that's the other thing, Juan, to go back to what you asked, is that we would hope that people at the awareness or recognition or whatever we decide to call it, come in and go, okay, here I am. I'm comfortable here for the moment, but let's see, maybe I'll move up. And so that they learn from the work that you've all been doing and the toolkit, what they could do to understand. And then they do that and they go, oh, okay, now let me see what I have to do or what are some ways that I can implement. So we would hope people would want to move up, but understanding that they may come in at one level or another. And I don't think we expect people to be at the same level for each of these content areas, right? So they might come in on the, whoever said it when we first started, that probably people were high in the top level or whatever we're calling it for the inclusive learning environments, but maybe engaging with families, it might be somebody in here, is it a 1 or a 2 or a, you know, at different levels. So I think the other thing, just as I'm rambling, is to think about how we help. I think the toolkit wants to help people see how they move between the levels.
Can I say something before I leave? I gotta run soon. But so in my experience, I think that frameworks are really hard. Like, I think it took me a long time to finally get connected learning framework. And it was based on like experience, right? Like, but I think that what this cohort has is like a lot of this framework in practice, right? Like a lot of us came here at different levels and we were able to implement CTS and CS, having many of these components in there. So I'm wondering how we can use that to demonstrate to others what this framework looks in practice.
Right, right.
It's just some like an idea, I think.
And I think that goes with the perspective. You know, I think if you can walk into this framework understanding that if you're going to assess where you fit in the framework, assessing it as an organization. And so whether that organization, you know, is Seattle Public Library or Homer Public Library, where you jump in or where you are is going to be different. But I think right now, you know, talking about the I statements, it's as if I see it as, okay, I start here and I want to progress all the way across to the right in every one of these categories, and then I get the badge, right? But I don't think that's necessarily a good expectation for every organization, every situation. And I think it's just some way to think about that. And I think that's kind of what Juan's talking about, is that idea of, as an organization, you know, can your administrator be in the lead column on one piece and the children's librarian is at, you know, that piece, a leader in some piece. So I think if we kind of have that organizational perspective and somehow to verbalize that, that might make this more manageable.
Another thing too to keep in mind is that this framework is ultimately supposed to be a window into finding resources. So if you're really, really high in one level, you've been doing community engagement forever, you may not want to look at resources that people are using in that area. You might be, you've never done an outcomes-based assessment maybe. And so, it is a framework. I totally agree, frameworks are hard, but maybe that's a more tangible way to think about this framework, is it is supposed to be sort of a lens that a library can use to find resources in the toolkit that match what they are trying to do. So if they are trying to go from, well, I know this is important, but I have never implemented it in engaging families, then they could drill down and find things that actually, so it's action oriented as opposed to this more conceptual, because right now what we're talking about is all super conceptual, right? And it is like, that's a lot. And there are a lot of strands and a lot of themes, but that's sort of why we're really harping on it and coming back to it, is we think it could be a way for people to get into resources in a way that maps onto the concepts that are important to RtC, but that match with what the library or the person, and that also is where you could do it as an individual or as a library and find whatever resources are necessary.
But then if the toolkit is able to tell people what you just said and make it so that you do this, right? And then you drill down from framework to actually resources, then it'll be really great, right? Because then you are providing the people with these high level concepts, and then you say, if you want to move along, then this is what you should do. Mm-hmm. It should be very clear in the toolkit, and that would be an amazing thing to have, right? For anyone coming in. Because I think I've seen frameworks that I stay in the conceptual level, and then you're like, where do I start?
Right, and why is it useful to me?
Right, so if you are able
right.
to link it to like specific resources, examples, it will be really, really good.
Yeah, I like your analogies I'm seeing in the comments here.
And Nikki has this idea or a website she's looked at, and she put it a little bit at the top, I think, of the first page. Is it up there? No, I don't remember where I saw her put it. But where you would go to a web page perhaps, and might see providing and creating inclusive learning environments, and then you would hover over that and see the different big ideas and go, oh, here's where I am. I mean, there'd be more around it, and you would hover or click on that, and you then dig deeper and deeper into resources and personas and strategy and things like that. Does that make sense? I mean, it might not look like that exactly, but like you would drill down to get to the content.
Anyway, I gotta go, but this was super awesome. Thank you. I'll see you next week.
Bye, Juan. So within the context of what we're saying, and this is a piece of the toolkit, as we saw last week, what the different elements are. This, from what I'm hearing, this would be useful. And I think the more we can probably talk a little bit about, not today, about how people move from level to level will also be really useful, because that will help us inform what the different things are in the resources and how we help people to do that.
So are we expecting, I think there's kind of two perspectives. One is that as an organization, we're kind of reading this framework and using the framework to find resources, to dig deeper. So if that's the case, it seems maybe there's less weight on the moving from left to right. Mm-hmm. Is that true, or do we actually want people to use the framework to move from left to right and follow the arrows? Is that ultimately
well, I think we want people to know where they are and where we would hope they would get.
And
right?
I think part of the left to right also was wanting people who have never done this work before to not feel like there's not a space for them, because that's something we have definitely heard, is some people feel like, oh my God, people are using Python, there's no way I'm there. Whereas this provides an entry point maybe for even if you've never really done CT or CS. So those lower levels of, oh, I recognize what I am doing that along these lines, I understand this concept now. The entry point there was important to encourage, to hopefully reflect those people who haven't yet done these things, but still feel like this is a space for them. There's resources for them. if that makes sense. So I don't know that we would expect everybody to be advocates for everything at the end of their participation. That seems unrealistic. But that entry point piece, I think, is really important. Being able to capture people to keep going and find resources, even if they are very new in all of these areas, that was important.
So that idea of kind of capturing people where they are and helping them dig deeper, as Stacy was saying.
And
Okay.
I think that point what Kristen made about you could go from understanding to implementation and back and forth again, I think that's part of the, that's a really exciting part of this, is that you can learn from what you worked on, that, oh, you know what, I need to go back and understand some more, and then again. But it's not static either. It's just giving people this opportunity to see themselves and gain some skills. Yeah, that's a good point, Matthew.
Very good. I think we're trying to do two things, trying to advocate for RtC at the same time that we're providing kind of direct, actionable resources for people.
Yeah. And we are actually almost out of time. Are there any other thoughts about this? Exactly right, Stacey. Yeah. Other thoughts about this? And you can keep adding comments on the doc itself. We now have our basic structure from last week of where we're heading with all these pieces.
I just want to, this is kind of a general comment, but I've been talking to some librarians, all really in really small libraries over the last couple of weeks on a different topic, and coding has popped up as something that they wish they could be doing, but they're feeling like they don't have the resources or whatever. I think they're actually a prime audience for this toolkit. But I think what's relevant to this conversation is that they're really coming at this from coding. They hear coding, we should be doing coding, all these other libraries are doing coding. And so, but then it's like, they get here and it jumps to computational thinking. And I think it's just thinking about that and really having to help people understand the computational thinking value of coding, and coding's just the gateway into that for some libraries. But I don't think they necessarily appreciate that whole picture. And so I'm trying to think about it, this framework, from their perspective. Like, where could they jump in? Is it at awareness, or, and some of these they might jump in at different points because they get family engagement or they get inclusive programming. But applying it to CT and CS, there's that kind of practical learning that they need to do, even if they have some of those bigger concepts. So I just have been thinking about that in relation to this framework and how those kind of work together.
That could be a persona, and I think that resonates strongly, I think, to make it into one of the personas, someone who's coming in with that.
It also is making me, I think this is coming up again and again and again. This idea of, CT, we can't assume for a minute that we can be jumping right into CT. And so that piece up front, even before you get into the framework of CT, might have to have its own levels. Like, have you never, something that really emphasizes that before you even start to drill down and recognize how you might be doing CT in these ways already. But I think this keeps coming up, and I think it's a really good point. So thank you.
And Paula, I think we should do that next week. That idea of what is CT and how to talk about it and things like that. And we started just talking computational thinking literacies. And I can't remember if we've said this before, but that idea that it's a literacy, I think, will help resonate with library staff and others. So yeah, let's do that next week. Anything else? This is also the question and answer period. Caitlin, anything on your mind? Anybody else? Thank you so much, everyone, for sticking with us through this framework and over and over again. This was really helpful and really awesome. So I appreciate that you were able to do that. So we'll see you next Wednesday in the earlier part of the day, and we'll make CT the focus. And so we'll send out an email a little bit more about what that's all about. A great day, everyone, and see you next week. You don't.